Piece might actually be the best live-action adaptation ever, but there are a ton of changes that were actually made from the original story, like how instead of meeting Zoro tied up at the marine base, he is literally introduced by chopping this dude in half, stuffing him into a bag, and taking him straight into a bar. Like, seriously, what the heck is going on here? And actually, speaking of bars, they also added neon lights to many of the bars in the series. Like, what? I mean, I guess the whole One Piece world has upgraded from the anime because electricity seems to be just a normal thing pretty much everywhere here. I mean, it even shows up on battleships and even in Kaya's mansion. Okay, but now let's go back to the very beginning for probably the biggest change in the entire live action. That's because Vice Admiral Garp shows up at Roger's execution and gives this super serious speech, which is not like his character from the original show at all. But that was just a start because Garp's entire storyline of chasing down Luffy was just completely made up for the live action specifically. Although yes, he did originally train Kobe and Helmeppo also in the manga and the anime, and while I really enjoyed the added development for Kobe, the extra tension of the marine threat, and some mind-blowingly hilarious Helmeppo scenes that we'll talk about in just a moment, the overall vibe of Garp just barely resembles the loose cannon rule-breaking Vice Admiral that we all know from the anime. And speaking of the legendary Helmeppo himself, he was pretty much just a goofy character from the anime, but he had the most shocking scene in the entire live-action series when in the very first episode, he was just caught butt naked playing with Zoro's swords, looking like he needs to compensate for something. And what's even more impressive though is the absolute powerhouse of a battleship that Garp now rides around on. I mean, honestly, this is much more intimidating than his original ship in the anime right here. Notice, kind of cute. On the other hand, one of the most disappointing changes for me was that the live action just completely skipped the very end of Luffy's backstory. Because in case you don't know, in the anime, this scene shows Luffy at age 17 then, ready to set out to sea on his adventure, and as he leaves, he lands this massive punch that completely knocks out this giant sea monster, showing us all just how much Luffy has actually grown. But nope, just completely cut from this version. But maybe they skipped it for this insane reason, because there is no doubt in my mind that the live action versions of the characters are way weaker overall than in the original story. Yeah, I said it. I mean, they were literally trapped by Buggy inside a simple wooden box, but Zoro and Luffy were so weak that they couldn't even break out of that. Although later on in the live action, we actually see Luffy apparently punching through stone, so a little bit of a head scratcher here for me. But actually, one other awesome change is that Nami's first staff can now collapse into a size that can be easily carried on her waist, which is pretty cool if you ask me. She didn't have that in the manga. And actually, speaking of Nami, we see her actually doing burglar stuff in the live action, like breaking into a safe, which sadly we never actually got to see much during the anime or manga. Plus, I was completely shocked when Nami saw the devastating damage that Buggy did to Orange Town. I mean, damn, this had way more impact than in the original story. But of course, that's not the only change to Buggy's part of the story, because in the live action, the clown is like 10 times more evil than in the actual anime. I mean, originally, he never kidnapped all the villagers or threatened to torture a little kid. Like, whew. And the live action actually gave us a very rare big brain Luffy moment when he came up with the plan to trap Buggy's body parts in the crates here. Because if we actually compared this exact moment to the manga, it was actually Nami who decided to tie up Buggy's limbs with some rope here. However, the reward for saving this village was nothing compared to what it was in the anime. That's because the mayor of Orange Town offered live action Luffy this tiny basket of food, but in the original, the crew came away with giant sacks stuffed full of goodies. Which now brings me to maybe one of the most controversial changes to the live action, which was all the times that Nami hinted that she was never going to betray the crew. And well, it kind of did this weird, oh, is she gonna stay? Is she gonna go? Oh, she's actually leaving thing during the Baratie. Overall, I just feel like it really kind of spoiled the one mind-blowing twist from the original East Blue story when Nami abandoned the crew at Baratie, kind of seeming actually evil. Now, of course, on the other hand, it was amazing to see these kind of like mini earbud versions of the transponder snails, which never have shown up in the original story. And so now we come to the single most changed arc of the entire story, and that's of course Syrup Village, where we meet Usopp for the very first time. And man, this place is so different. Like, in the live action, turned this tiny little peaceful village in the hills into like this super busy shipbuilding island. And I have to be honest, at first I really hated this, but I finally eventually came around to like it when the live action kind of added Luffy describing his perfect ship, which just goes to show how important the ship is as a part of the crew. Plus, they actually gave Usopp a brand new job working on ships, which kind of helps explain a little bit better his ability to actually fix up the Mary during their future adventures as we know them from the anime. But that's really just the start of the wild changes in Syrup Village, because Nami bonding with Kaya was never part of the original story, though I will admit that the added character development for Kaya was really awesome, and she even gave my man Usopp the very first kiss in the entire story. Just don't tell Sanji about that, I guess. But then they dropped the ball on Kaya's entire story arc by cutting the one scene where she actually stands up to Kuro in the original story. I mean, seriously, this was her one moment to show some courage, but nope, gone. And speaking of Kuro, they actually cut out almost his entire crew, which, you know, is kind of important for a pirate captain. And if that wasn't bad enough, they left him with probably the most cringe characters in the entire show, Sham and Bucci. Plus, they even cut out this dude who was one of my favorite parts of this entire arc in the anime in the first place. Then we also have to mention the changes to this sheephead dude's story, because unlike in the anime, Mary is not a butler, but instead he's Kaya's financial advisor, which is honestly a little bit sad because he was one of Kaya's only true friends in her entire household. And then of course he just ends up actually dying, unlike in the manga where he survives and then he was the one who gave the crew the ship himself. But now we sadly have some of the worst changes in the live action for me, which unfortunately all involve Usopp. So first of all, they took away Usopp's long nose, which maybe I can kind of understand look-wise why they did it, and then they made Usopp do literally nothing during the final fight to save Kaya. He's supposed to be a coward who then overcomes his fear, not just a coward. But then the worst part is that he cannot even fire a cannon. Like, that's just unacceptable to me. He's supposed to be an expert sharpshooter who can hit a rock super far away. That is like his one thing that he's actually good at, and they took even that away from him. Okay, but enough of Usopp. Let's talk about a really dumb change for Zoro's backstory instead. And that's because in the original story, we see Zoro talking to the master of the dojo before Kuina even ever dies. However, in the live action, they literally never interact until Kuina's death, which just makes this awkward exchange where Zoro has to ask for Kuina's sword instead of Koshiro giving it to him on his own just feels so weird. They also made Kuina's hair super blue for some weird reason instead of its normal black, and Zoro's famous sword is also slightly changed as the blade is missing the normal black part of the blade on the non-cutting side. And so instead of the texture it has in the anime, it just has this uniform shiny metal kind of vibe to it. But the one change that I've been complaining about more than anything else since the very first promotional images of the show came out is the way that the Mary's figurehead looks here. I mean, isn't this supposed to be the perfect friendly little sheep, not the stuff to summon Satan and curse my nightmares? But another thing that made no sense here too was how Luffy didn't even know that he could blow himself to block the cannonball. I mean, he's had his devil fruit for over 10 years since he was a kid, and in the anime he was doing way crazier stuff than this with like no problem at all. And I know there was a lot of negativity, and the 2 episodes in Syrup Village were probably my least favorite, so now let's move on to probably the most amazing change in the entire live action, which is that they really turned Sanji's pervertedness meter all the way down to 0, like maybe a little bit above, but very low. I mean, seriously, it's like he's a new man who just happens to enjoy flirting with the ladies like Nami and Nojiko instead of being like super over the top weird with girls like he is in the anime. And honestly, really almost all the changes at the Baratie were just fantastic. It looks incredible, and the best part was that this place really gave us drunk Usopp, and what else could we possibly ask for? In case you didn't notice, they also changed the reason why Luffy was forced to work for Zeph, because originally Luffy launched a cannonball which crashed into the floating restaurant, so he was forced to work to pay off the damage. But in the live action, he just didn't have any money at all to pay the bill, which makes sense and was kind of funny and in line with Luffy's character, but a little bit less cool in my humble opinion. Plus, the decision to just completely eliminate Don Krieg from like ever showing up at the Baratie was a simply amazing choice. Because while I don't love the fact that Garp felt that he needed to call Mihawk for help, the world's strongest swordsman new introduction showed us just how badass he truly is without wasting a ton of time by bringing Krieg to the Baratie. And can I just say, I love that they introduced the fishmen in this arc already. Starting from this fishman serving as the restaurant's front of house to Arlong showing up like a mob boss for the entire East Blue, it really all worked out well to expand the scope of the entire One Piece world and the East Blue in particular, I think. However, Arlong's fight with Luffy in episode 6 shows off one of the worst mistakes in the entire show, I think. And that's because when Arlong sends Luffy flying, we can clearly see that he's actually hurting Luffy with these blows. However, in reality, Luffy's rubber body should make him immune to damage from regular punches, kicks, and even bullets, like we saw early in episode 1 when Alvida smashed him with her club and shot him. Really, the only thing that should really cause Luffy any damage at this point are sharp objects like blades or teeth, and of course, the obvious threat of drowning. And also, let's be real, the original Luffy would never get crushed by Arlong in this scene because he is way stronger than the fishman, but I guess we can say it's because this version of Luffy is in the end weaker than the original anime version. Also, can we just point out how much Usopp's slingshot looks like a toy in this shot? I honestly never got that feeling when seeing it in the anime, but maybe that was what they were going for. Now, if you've watched Through the Water 7 arc in the anime, then you should find that this next new scene is absolutely hilarious. And that's because when Sanji is talking to Luffy and Usopp on the Going Merry, he says that a captain's decisions are what separates him from the rest of the crew. And then Luffy literally looks right at Usopp, which is just a really fun Easter egg for viewers who know what happens later on in the story. If you don't know, I'm not gonna say anything. And earlier I said that Syrup Village looked way different, but this next set is also way different from its original, because in the anime, Kokoyashi Village is shown as a tropical paradise which hides the dark secrets, but in the live action they just transformed it into a super rural village full of huts. Which, I mean, makes sense since these people are being bled dry, but I still miss the appearance of the anime, I'll be honest. Arlong Park also had a very serious makeover. They basically made it a club with some random carnival games thrown in there, which is a lot different from the original location. And the live action also made one other really confusing choice during this arc here, and that's because originally the people in Kokoyashi Village knew about Nami's sacrifice to work for Arlong from the very beginning, which made them never hate her in the first place. But in the live action, they don't know anything, and there's just this super rough dynamic of Nami literally forcing the villagers to cough up more cash. And so these people who in the original story actually loved her in secret just think that she's a straight out traitor here. Plus, then she had to spell it out for Nojiko so her own sister wouldn't hit her with a shovel. What? Then they also cut out these two bounty hunter brothers and this octopus fishman, which honestly I think is understandable and a good choice why they cut out the octopus, because honestly it would take a lot of really good CGI to make this character work at all. However, he does play a pretty important role in the future, so I wonder if they'll actually bring him back at some point. But now let's actually discuss some awesome and some also kind of bizarre changes about the world's greatest swordsman. Because in the anime, Mihawk actually never came to Baratie looking for Luffy, he only came to the floating restaurant chasing after Don Krieg. But in this version, he weirdly follows actual orders from the Marines, which is kind of out of character for him, I'd say. The live action Mihawk also makes a direct comment about Luffy's head, which is just such cool foreshadowing of his connection to Shanks. And he actually goes on to compare Luffy to Roger, which is the same thing that Zeph does later on when talking to Garp. So there are a lot more obvious connections to Luffy and Roger than we ever had in the anime, where it's just kind of hinted at very carefully. However, one absolute terrible change I think that they made to his awesome character are his boots. I mean, just look at those things here. And I have nothing against cowboy boots, but honestly, it looks like he's ready to ride a bull, not fight legendary duels, in my opinion. But speaking of character designs overall, they made so many amazing improvements on other characters' outfits. In particular, the Straw Hats, who were many of the outfits that we actually see in volume covers of the manga, instead of sticking with the same clothes for most of the East Blue. Although I'll have to say some changes were a little bit too far out there for me, like Sanji literally wearing Vans while stranded during his flashback, and there were also Ben Beckman and Belmare, who both kind of looked much older than they should have in the original story. But the single worst character design change to me just has to be Arlong, and that's because this dude is just too small. Let's be real. In the anime, the fishman towers over Luffy and the crew, which really adds a sense of intimidation and fear. I mean, seriously, look at this guy in the anime. He's basically twice as tall as Ginzo, but in the live action, he's just slightly taller, which just doesn't have the same effect. It looks he has like a too big head for a too small body. And another very odd change was that they made Nami bury her treasure right next to her mother's grave. I mean, Nojiko even pointed out how kind of messed up that is. Which, even with her excuse, I think is still messed up, because in the anime, Belmare's grave was by the ocean and Nami kept her money buried in a tangerine grove. But there's actually one other major change to the live action that I haven't mentioned at all yet, and that is everything involving Buggy the Clown. And if you want to hear my full thoughts on his added involvement in the story and my entire thoughts on all 8 episodes together, then you can watch my full breakdown and review of the live action right here. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.